nice one, Niall, with the bottles.
Oh!
Yeah. Now, I was just thinking that there is a certain irony about Niall and myself trying to get a load of people into a pub on a Monday night when we're both straight edgers. That's how life works out.
We're going back to the bean for a tea
Okay,
party.
great. Yeah. You should, seriously, people, you should see us on a Tuesday night. Loaf of brown bread, a couple of nuts. Okay, so yeah, we've done the country. That's fine. Consigned to history now, and we're back to Dublin for these pants. We've got Marcus the Cogain from UCD from 1976, from the legendary Dr. Feelgood gig, from the Eddie and the Hot Rods gig that was pivotal for the Radiators first gig. It was I was speaking to the former manager of the Boomtown Rats during the week, and I said, that Marcus was going to be here, and he put on the Eddie and the Hot Rods gig, and he remembered, and Geldof wrote about it in his book. Faulkner remembered Geldof seeing, this new wave band coming to Ireland, and the quote was, "We're fucking better than them." but it was a key moment, because it was a moment where Irish bands, fueled by that fire of 1976, 77, thought, actually, we can compete. So, Marcus, we're delighted that you're with us. And then, there will be a thread of punk rock through most of the things that Niall and myself do. And Colm O'Dwyer did one of the biggest favours that anyone has ever done for me in my life. I was living in New York. I was going to see a folk singer every week, and I thought he was great, and I thought that the world should see him, but he had never recorded anything. And I called Colm up and said, "Colm, there's this guy, and he's great. Would you put him on the Trinity Ball?" And I knew at that stage it was completely booked. And he said, "Oh, can I hear him?" And I said, "No," because he's never recorded anything. And he said, there was a moment of silence. Okay, so you want me to bring over someone that I've never heard, and that you can't even play over the phone? And in fairness, Colm said, "Yeah, I'll put him on." And it was Jeff Buckley with his first gig outside of Manhattan. So I'm eternally grateful that you did that. But Colm was also, and I get the dates wrong, so Colm was the Ents Officer when Trinity College was having its birthday, and it was 400-year-old. So instead of doing the biggest social event of its kind in Europe, they did a bigger one. Now, some of you might go to the Trinity Ball this year or next year, but guess what? It's not the same as it used to be, because it used to be the entire campus. Now, I don't mean that the people were older at it, but it used to be the entire campus. And then, Colm, your year, it included the cricket pitch where Beckett had played cricket. It was the entire campus. So between these two guests, you've got the whole moment, and then Colm's other great moment, Jeff Buckley, putting on Jeff Buckley's first gig outside of Manhattan, wasn't the best gig that Colm put on that week, because he also helped put on the Fugazi gig that's legendary and rightly so. So, Marcus, some people get into doing the Ents because they love music, but some of them are business people, and you had a business head on you.
Yeah, it was a kind of mixture of both. I mean, Barry was talking about being raised on the idol music. I was raised on Maria Callas. Was given a French. I was actually given a violin by Santa Claus, but 3 days later it was matchwood, so I was given a French horn, more durable. But yeah, that's the sort of background it came from. But then I think when I was 8, I heard Highway 61 Revisited, and that's when my life changed.
Oh.
I was saying I wasn't into music, but I suppose I was. I went to college after school. Sorry, I went to London. After leaving Blackrock College in '73, and I was going to make loads of money, pay my way through college, worked at Fords and Dagenham and putting windscreen motors into Ford Cortinas 250 times a day. I made good money. But I arrived back in Ireland this September with £20 and 100 albums. But when I was involved in the Students' Union, finance officers at the Students' Union. I was treasurer of the bar. So when I got involved in the Ents side, I really approached it from a business side. I was a commerce student. But yeah, we had a budget. It was self-financing. And so I maybe looked at the gig as a business proposition rather than entertaining the masses. So I remember you talked about Paul Charles. Paul Charles was a lovely guy. He'd fit into the Lord of the Rings. He was like all hair and two little round glasses. But I focused on bands which were up and coming. You know? Bands who were already made a name for themselves, they were too expensive. You know? And bands who were over the hill, you know, thought they were worth 10 times more than they were worth. So we focused on bands which were up and coming. They were hungry and we could get them cheap. And we lucked out in a lot of cases. I mean, Eddie and the Hot Rods, when they came, I think they were number 4 the week they played. The Raising Cars were number 10. And Feel Good, the week they played, their album was number 1. And it was just pure luck. But yeah, it was considered a business. It's a funny story. It was an elected position. And it was called the Social Welfare Vice President. And my opponent in the election was Dave Kavanagh, who went on to manage Clannad. And out of 5,000 votes, after about 15 read counts, I won by 1 vote. And I remember Billy McGrath was there, who was, I think, Dave Kavanagh's election manager. They smashed a bottle of champagne on the floor. But Dave took over the welfare side. We decided to split the job. Dave took over the welfare side and spent the rest of the year giving out free condoms to students. And I took over the entertainment side and spent the rest of the year trying to get students into the humour of using the condoms. But yeah, it was actually a difficult time because, don't forget, I think 11 months before I took over, the Miami Showband Massacre had happened. And we found there was an awful lot of resistance, particularly for English bands coming over to Ireland. And I have to say, kudos to Billy McGrath, he had actually done a great job the year before. So I was really only following in his footsteps. And possibly couldn't have done it without him. But we would set up a circuit. In those days there was no Ryanair. So bands that came over, they got the boat. It took time, it took money. So it would have been too expensive to bring a band over for one gig. So we tried to set up a circuit. Cork, Galway, Belfast, and Dublin. But an awful lot of the bands were very resistant. We used to have to provide escorts, you know, bands travelling to the north. I remember Gong, one of the bands. Gong, yeah.
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 So, let's just make this very clear, people. So, Marcus brought Gong, prog rock superheroes, over to Ireland.
Okay, the roadie's job was to swallow the dope in condoms to cross the border. And they were playing the Whitla Hall in Belfast on a Sunday. And all pubs, of course, in Belfast were closed. And we arrived there 6 hours before to do the show. There's already 100 kids outside drinking flagons of cider. So you know this is going to be a rowdy one. Gong were being supported by a band called Spike. Spike was basically made up of Van Morrison's own backing band, them. And Spike were brilliant. Spike got 9 encores. Gong went on, and Gong went into their like 15, 20 minute solos. And after, halfway through Gong's second number, the crowd got, "We want Spike! We want Spike!" I never felt so far sorry for a band. But yeah, they were fun times.
Yeah, so I told you Marcus brought Gong over. I mentioned Marcus brought Gong over, and he also ended their spirit. He crushed their spirit in Belfast. But so you're around that moment of punk. There's a sea change. There's a load of young bands. You're a Dylan fan. You like your music. You've been to London, and you've got a decent record collection. So Eddie and the Hot Rods you bring, Racing Cars, which was another one of Paul Charles, and Marcus was putting on the biggest gig in Ireland every single week. Like there were 1,000 people going. Like how were the gigs structured? Like
Okay, it was in the restaurant. Top floor, there was a live band always. normally from England. Middle floor was a chill out area, coffee bar, and bottom floor was the disco. But yeah, no, there was 12 to 1,500 people there every Saturday night. It would take us for 50, 60 cents, 50, 60 cents it was at the time. But yeah, and there was security. We had 4 professionals, and we had 25 external security, we had 15 internal security. We had 4 people whose job was only to go around postering Dublin every week. They get 300 posters every Monday, go around postering Dublin, you know, doing it at night with masks on because it was totally illegal. But yeah, it's funny, you know, the first gig I ever put on was the McGrath sisters. And they were such sweet, sweet people. They were unheard of. And CBS actually gave me 20 copies of the record, which I sent out to all reporters, and they got rave reviews. We sold out 2 shows. That was the first gig I put on. The last gig I actually put on was Belfield Burning, where changed Irish music. You know, it was Radiators headlined, supported by the Undertones, the Vipers, the Cranberries, and Patrick Coolty was down there that night. And it was a strange, strange night. I'd actually resigned the week before after some political shenanigans and scandals going on. So Anne Purcell she was doing her first night, although I'd set up the gig. And I was in the bar about 10:30, and I heard some incident that happened. So I went over, I rang the police, and I told the guys in the door not to let anybody out. And the guy seemed fine, you know. He was talking, he didn't seem to be in too much pain, there was really no blood. And 2 cops came and thought, they obviously thought the same, you know. They came, asked a couple of questions and left. 1:30 in the morning, 50 cops arrived. The guy died. Apparently, the stab wound had punctured one of his lungs. And yeah, gig stopped in Belfield. Punk was kind of almost barred from Dublin, from Ireland for a long, long time afterwards. It changed Irish music. But also at the same time, I think it had there's always a silver lining. It professionalised Irish music a lot. People had to look at it from a really different point of view. You know, focus on security, you know, focus on the broader aspects and not just the music. But yeah, that was the last gig I ever put on.
No, and you know, at our last chat, you know, Pete and Steve from the Radiators spoke of it. You know, they're still traumatised by the fact that they helped organise a gig, but it was noted by the judge when the court case was heard. The judge very, very clearly said that the security, the conduct of the concert by these amateurs, by people who were students, essentially was impeccable. That it was really, really well organised. And you mentioned the bouncers. The bouncers, as I recall, were not to be trifled with. So there was one character, do you?
There was. The bouncers, we assumed they were ex-mercenaries. We didn't ask too many questions. You know? And it was better that way if people thought they were ex-mercenaries because they would show more respect. But what they were really, really good at, it was diffusing situations. I never actually ever saw anyone having to get involved in a fight, you know? Except there was one time this guy he kept needling, call me up names, you fucking this, you fucking that, fucking that. So he said, I'll tell you what, you know, what I'll do is I'll punch your 2 teeth, I'll punch your teeth out and call me Gappy. And it just, again, diffused the situation.
But then did he do some kind of...
There was one old guy, he was 65, and he always had his dirty old man raincoat, and he always had his hands in his pockets. And people thought, what could this guy do? You know? And he did this drop kick. You know, it was 8 foot in the air and landed back on his feet. And everybody said, okay, don't mess with him.
And then you go outside of UCD to put on the Dr. Feelgood gig in the National Stadium.
Yeah.
And the National Stadium was built for boxing. It was run by the Boxing Federation, and the bouncers were boxers who hated young people. So, how did that gig go? How did that turn out for you, Marcus?
I tell you, it was one of the most stressful gigs I ever put on. Dr. Feelgood, the manager, used to hate Ents Officers. He used to eat them for lunch. You know, they were tough East Enders. And they were on a percentage. The gig was sold out. But the bouncers, we had no choice of the security. When you get the stadium, you had to use their bouncers. They let in about 200 or 300 of their friends. You know? So Dr. Field was manager on one side saying we're trying to rip them off. At the same time, we had Dublin Fire Brigade saying, too crowded, we're closing down the gig. You know? And half the audience saying, when is it going to start? When is it going to start? You know? Okay, and eventually worked out. You know, we had to pay over the odds to Dr. Field just to get them to go up on stage. But yeah, you know, it's, I suppose, if anybody here is thinking of putting on an event, make sure you have control over everything. In the stadium, we didn't have control over the venue, we didn't have control over the security, you know, and you leave yourself wide open.
Yeah, and you know, that's a great point. And then after that, there's no punk or new wave or young people's bands allowed in that venue for quite some time. So, Marcus, thank you, and we'll come back to you. And Colm, the Fugazi gig we have to talk about, but how did you become an Ents officer, and you know, what type of music made you think, I want to be involved?
Before, I'm trying to remember back, like what persuaded me to run for it, but because in Trinity at the time it was an elected position, but I had been interested in music, but and I'd always gone to the Trinity Bowl and a lot of gigs in Trinity at the time, in the Buttery, and Edwina was a couple of years before me, and I'd seen a lot of the acts she put on. I'd seen, you know, I'd been at the ball for a number of years, but my own background was I was more involved with the players in Trinity, which was a theatre group, and I acted a lot originally, and then I was the auditor of it for a while, and for some reason it just, I mean, I'd always been interested in music, and I don't know, I just decided that was what I wanted to do, and ran for it, and got elected, and yeah, that was, and then proceeded as Ents officer, but it was, yeah, it was slightly out of, I was, I mean, I'm a lawyer now, but I was a business studies student, ESS as it was in Trinity at that stage, economic and social studies, so sometimes looking back, it's very difficult to figure out what possessed you. I hadn't worked with the Ents crew or anything like that before, but yeah, I got elected, as I said, and really enjoyed the year after that, and still look back very fondly on it now. And I think sometimes maybe it wasn't such a bad thing to not be necessarily coming from the, you know, from the previous Ents crews or anything like that. So maybe I brought a little bit of, you know, I mean, it was a different way of thinking about it, so it's maybe, and something a little bit new for some people. But,
yeah, so you go in with a clean slate, no experience, you haven't worked for 3 years with these people, and you've got the biggest Trinity Ball in history coming up in May. Like, do you remember any of the gigs that stand out as great moments, or
for me before that, or,
during your time that you organised? Any special memories?
well, because of the 400th year, I mean, we had the Trinity Bowl was huge. It was 12 stages, like 14,000 people at it, and this was before there were a lot of festivals or anything like that. So it was, yeah, that was fantastic. But actually, probably the one that sticks out for me or stands out for me at this stage is the. It's funny because it was the first one, was the Freshers Ball that I did, which I heard Angley talking about the Cranberries, and just around that time they were. I remember I think I went to Limerick and I met Bear, and there was a lot of discussion. We were trying to form this Ents network that bands could tour around colleges, but it was quite difficult to do that. But one of the things that I remember happened, and I can't quite remember how it happened, but I got handed a tape of the Cranberries, the very early songs, and it sounded amazing. So between the jigs and the blues, I'd give them I'd like to give them a gig for the Freshers' Ball in that would be 1991, and it ended up being a very odd lineup because at that stage the singer Dolores was I think Bear said this earlier, but she was very, very shy, and she couldn't face the audience, so she used to turn her back to the which is amazing when you think later on with Zombie and all these kind of songs are very forceful, but she was really shy and turned around. And I remember in I think it's the Ed Byrne
Yeah, it's the Ed Byrne.
yeah, and actually, as it happens, because it was built as a lecture theatre, very good sound in there when gigs are on there, and but she was still turning her back to the audience. You know, it was very strange. And then that night, it's funny how these things, when you're Ents Officer, I mean, with budgets and all the rest of it, it's very odd how it turns out. You know, you get people. I mean, you can't afford to pay their normal rates at all. That was a general rule for all of us. I mean, it's funny, I think Edwina, by the sound of things, had more money for her ball than I had for the 12 stages and the but I do remember there was a woman who was living in Dublin at the time called Maria McKee, and some of you may remember her. She was a huge international hit, but she was living in Dublin at the time, and she was interested in playing, and she played, so we ended up with the Cranberries and her playing the Edinburgh Theatre, and the sound was really good, and they both, I mean, I don't know, I haven't really followed her career, but she had an amazing voice, beautiful singer, but her and the Cranberries were playing together, and then we had Bad Manners upstairs, you know, which was the most sort of bizarre kind of, when I look back now, kind of mixture, and they were amazing too. And then we had, you know, while Maria McKee was playing, and it was soft, you know, but really nice music, and everyone was really into it. But meanwhile, we'd all the whole lot of skinheads trying to get in through the front door in the arts block, and it was just, I mean, it's just this combination of, you know, which is pretty typical of student gigs at the time. But it was you know, I suppose because it was my first gig, and it was an amazing experience. And then, I mean, I suppose obviously the Trinity Bowl itself, but to be honest, particularly as it got bigger, like, you know, when it was so big like that, you don't have too much control over it, I suppose, when it's going on. And the only bit I really remember is actually collapsing at the end of it on the cricket pitch, just literally fell out cold and slept for 4 hours on the cricket pitch after 3 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning. But yeah, that was an amazing thing to do, and I'm lucky enough, because it was that year, that it's recorded. There's a RTE made a documentary about it, and they've got a lot of footage from the night. So any of you that are in and around my age will, you can still view that. You can see it on online, and it's amazing to see. And one of the things that's funny, because the other guys are all talking about the 1970s, and to a certain extent the 80s, and the punk era, whereas this was obviously, this was 91, 92, slightly different. And what just, I mean, what I particularly enjoyed about the ball, and some of you who were at it may remember this, it was one of the first years that dance music was really coming in, and we had a lot of, I mean, I was looking back at the lineup today, and it was so odd I had a t-shirt, believe it or not, still, it doesn't fit me of course, but I had a t-shirt with the crew t-shirt with all of the acts from Trinity Week on the back. But it was just interesting for me to see that one of the acts, for example, was Orbital. And Orbital are still headlining gigs now at the moment. You'll probably see them, I mean, I think they're in quite a few over the summer. There were other dance acts just you know, the very beginning of the, I suppose it would have been the rave scene and other acts that were kind of reacting to it. I remember, so you mentioned that Petrol Emotion earlier on, but they were kind of reacting to the dance scene and were bringing out remixes of singles and things like that. So that was really interesting. There was another band that played, again, some of you may remember, called Sunscreen, and another Homeboy Hippie and Funky Dread, and these were all the very early, you know, this is even before Prodigy and these sort of acts, and it was just quite kind of interesting and exciting to be part of that as well. I was lucky with, again, with, I mean, I hadn't heard obviously of Jeff Buckley. I was very lucky that Michael introduced him to me, and then strangely when you see the names of the acts who were on, and then, you know, it's as if it was any great, you know, I had any you know, great sense of the music, but he was amazing, and it's really nice to be associated with now with another person who played that night as a guest. Was Kirsty McCall, who, again, and very oddly, I mean, I always felt like I was sort of in a certain way cursed, because both of them were dead within a couple of years after that, you know. I know it's true, but she was, it's funny when you look back now, I mean, she was amazingly talented, and they were only the guest stars, and then there was, you know, a lot of the Irish acts of the time, including Therapy, that Petrol Emotion, House, who were another amazing band. Many of you may remember. And then I had the added benefit, I suppose, of running, or not running, but of the gig in the SFX that we did with Fugazi and Chumbawamba, which was really Niall and Michael's baby, but we were. There was a terrible difficulty at that time in getting places to play. It sounds incredible now, but there was a terrible difficulty getting places to play back then, and this was the big problem. I mean, a band like Fugazi really, you know, we had trouble finding somewhere to play that wasn't automatically connected with the big promoters at the time, who were MCD, and we ended up. We ended up in difficulties because I seem to remember I contacted the venue, and because it was Trinity Week, and because we obviously had some money behind us and all the rest, and we could, whatever they needed in terms of deposit and all that kind of thing, we could do. But the difficulty was there seemed to be a sort of gentleman's agreement between the SFX and MCD Motors at that time, and it was going to be almost business as usual. I think that it was going to be, the gig was going to be pulled because it wasn't an MCD gig, and then it was really odd because the gig was organised for, it was an AIDS related, which was a huge issue at the time. It was an AIDS related gig, and I do remember that the was it Dennis Desmond? Yeah, it was he was very involved with a number of AIDS charities at the time, and he actually to pull this gig that was, you know, for an AIDS charity. So I think that just seemed to dissipate, and then we were able to have it. And that's one of my. It's funny the things that pop into your head. That was one of my. I just remember coming into the SFX, and I was kind of outside and worried about how it was going and all the rest of it, the usual kind of stuff. I didn't tend to actually go to a lot of the games. Like, I was at them, but I didn't go to them, if you know what I mean. I didn't really enjoy them because I'd be outside looking at the, you know, security or whatever it was, and or the, you know, just trying to make sure you're always looking to something else. You know, is the lighting okay, or is the, you know, is this working, or what's going on? And you're getting, you know, we didn't have mobile phones then. We only, you know, so it was walkie-talkies, and you're constantly getting things in your ear. And but I remember I just walked in one point when I didn't actually see Chumbawamba, but I remember I walked in at the start of Fugazi, and I think they were fairly much at their prime at that stage, maybe in 1991, you know, and just, because I just remember seeing these guys on stage, and they just, the energy, and they just started, like they jumped from the start to the finish, with sort of pogoing while playing, which any of you that have seen them will probably recognise, they said the energy, the physical energy involved. The first couple of minutes, and that was, it still sticks in my memory. It kind of blew me away to a certain extent. So they're the kind of, I suppose they're the main memories of that time, but.
Great memories, great memory. Just a bit of context with the Fugazi gig. I had nothing to do with it. I had emigrated at that stage. I was there. I was there watching these people, Niall and Miriam and the whole Hope Collective, bringing bands over that weren't on major labels, that had an ethic, that had a way of living. And those bands, thanks to Miriam and Niall and Valerie and that whole crew, and Timo, they just got bigger and bigger. And then they're big enough to be able to play the SFX, which is kind of the only place that you can go for a rock band at that moment. And Dennis Desmond has his office there, but the hall is owned by the Jesuits. And what Colm, Edwina, Niall and Miriam did was they put on a concert, and the ticket was illegal. The ticket was against the law of Ireland. They printed material on that ticket that rendered it something that was a legal offence.
How? Sorry, Mike.
I'll tell you later. So there was there was information about abortion referrals, and you could, and there were phone numbers, and it was a fantastic ticket. Like it was the ticket was a piece of art. Like that's the thing about these young people putting on their own things. They do things that are works of art and that change societies. But the Jesuits thought, no, that's not happening. Dennis Desmond thought, who are these upstarts? Like, I don't mind renting the hall if they're going to have a failure, and and there'll be more poor young people out there. But the combined authorities, and it was saved through the intervention of Colm and Edwina, who were able to send a letter on Trinity letterhead saying, we have a legal agreement with you about this concert. So the universities, the colleges, the people that we've seen tonight stood on the side of people who didn't have a chance. Who were doing things with no money, who were doing things for the spirit of it. So, you mentioned earlier, some of the speakers, that the entertainment officers in England, they were professionals. Like, they were in a job sometimes for 10 or 20 years. So it was totally different to someone getting elected, and in your case with no experience, with your case, Marcus, essentially no experience. So as an obsessive concert goer, I genuinely, I feel privileged to be sharing a stage with these people, and please give it up for our two speakers who represent the spectrum before it all changed, when MCD took over the colleges. So Colm and Marcus, thank you so much.